Hi there, and welcome to today's episode of Container Bytes, your 10-minute update on the latest in freight. I'm Julia Frohwein, as always joined by Judah Levine, our freight expert. Judah, how are you today?
I'm good. How's it going?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. All right, let's get into it.
Into
So,
July.
I hate to say it, but let's start with the Strait of Hormuz. Yes, it's July 1st. It feels like a bit of a broken record at this point, but what can we do? So there's a ceasefire, but there's also some periodic exchanges of fire. What's the latest there?
Yeah, so there's still this ceasefire that was signed or agreed upon early in June. But we've had instances of attacks on vessels and retaliations from the U.S. and back and forth. There was more just early this week. And basically what we're seeing is kind of a power struggle, not over whether the strait is kept open or not, but who's in charge. So Iran has made it clear that even through the memorandum of understanding, they understand that they're going to have sovereignty over the waterway, even though they hadn't had sovereignty before the war, and by international law, it seems like there should be kind of free passage that isn't sovereign to any nation, at least through what was the main channel. But what we're seeing now is Iran basically saying to all vessels in the region, if you want to pass, you have to kind of coordinate with this authority that they set up, and follow their instructions and follow the path or the lane that they have set up, which is the northern kind of channel just along the coast of Iran. There's another safe or secure channel at the moment, which is the southern channel around the coast of Oman. And on that channel, we had the IMO, which is the International Maritime Organization, the UN entity that was orchestrating kind of an organized evacuation or transits in and out, mostly out of the Persian Gulf through this other channel. But just this week, there was attacks. There was an attack actually on a container vessel, an Evergreen vessel that wasn't transiting through the Iranian one. It wasn't exactly in the IMO one either. And so the IMO has paused that effort, and negotiations now, whether they're starting or stopping is very unclear, are kind of focusing on that issue, what's going to happen in the Strait. So all this has meant kind of a start, a stop, and a start again of traffic through the Strait. The traffic is at much higher levels than it was, in May and the very beginning of June, or since the beginning of the war, but not anywhere near back to where it was. And the starting and stopping doesn't hurt. As I said, the traffic is mostly out, and it's mostly oil tankers or oil or LNG tankers. Also, some tankers entering, right? Because what the most kind of prioritized part is getting oil flows moving again. But again, with the uncertainty and with the lack of security in some areas, it's been not as smooth as was maybe expected.
Okay, and do these constant forward-back steps have any implications on...
So for container traffic in the region, yes, right? So we saw one of the vessels that were hit was a container vessel, and the container ships are trying to exit, right? They've been stuck there for a very long time. So it does impact those. It also impacts if there is no stability and there isn't the ability to go in and out. You're not going to see traffic back to the main ports in the Gulf, mostly in the UAE at Jebel Ali. And so you're going to have those containers still going in these alternative routes, which are going to accessible ports and then continue on by land bridge. So from that perspective, it continues to be disruptive. As we've said before, that's a very small part of the overall container market. So operationally, it doesn't have the biggest impact. But as we've said also from the beginning, the broad impact for the container market is on the cost of fuel. And the longer that it takes for crude flows to rebound to normal, the longer it will take for refined products like bunker fuel and jet fuel to go back to normal. Although we do continue to see fuel costs easing from where they were certainly much earlier in the war, and definitely even in June we're seeing prices drop pretty significantly.
Okay, and the cost of oil is also a driver of what's going on with freight rates and the early peak season. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so not exactly directly, right? So it's not that fuel costs are pushing rates up to where they are right now. That is really demand driven at the moment. So we're seeing a peak season that started early, really already by mid-May, has been really strong through June, and we'll see what happens into July. For the last week, rates were more or less stable, but they've increased really significantly since the middle of May. So Trans-Pacific rates, the West Coast, are above $6,000. That's a 120% increase, so more than doubled since mid-May. $8,000 to the East Coast, which is 85% higher than it was 6 weeks ago. And it's true on Asia-Europe as well. Asia-Europe were also about level last week, but like Trans-Pacific, they increased a little bit mid-May, and then big jump June 1st, big jump June 15th. So we have Asia-Europe rates that are almost $5,000 per container, which is up 70% in that span, and Mediterranean prices that are $6,500, which is up 85%. So there are multiple factors that are driving this, and some of them are related to the price of oil, but not to direct, fuel cost components of freight rates right now. One is that, I think as we've said before, some of the major shippers, they have long-term contracts with ocean carriers, and their fuel costs get adjusted quarterly. So whatever carriers paid in the previous quarter, that's what gets adjusted for shippers in the new quarter. We're about to enter Q3. Fuel costs were very high for carriers during Q2 because of the war, so those container rates are going to start to increase for those shippers. And similarly for manufacturer prices, a lot of manufacturers have either been absorbing cost increases so far or also have kind of quarterly contracts with importers. And so those costs are going to increase as well. So we're seeing front loading there. For U.S. shippers, there may also be some component of front loading ahead of expiring tariffs. Section 122, this 10% global level tariff is going to expire July 24th. And the White House is taking steps to implement tariffs by other means, which may be higher than that 10% level for many countries. So those are the issues pulling forward demand for now. Two of them are related to the cost of oil, and so they are kind of an impact of another impact of the war.
Okay, and is there any expectations the demand is going to keep going through July?
So as we said, front loading, if you're front loading, that means you're pulling forward from when they would normally go. So if there are very strong volumes earlier, we can expect that they'll be weaker than otherwise would have been volumes later on. The question is how late. If we have these front loading motivations for a July 1st deadline, then it's feasible that we'll start to see volumes start to be past their peak. It's not to say that we'll see a collapse, because we're still in what would normally be peak season, right? Not all shippers are having BAF increases or having those fuel increases now. And for the tariff component, right, there's still some time until those expire, although if you were expecting to kind of receive those goods by then, it's about getting too late. So we'll see. The other component, though, is that there's growing congestion. So there had been congestion at some European hubs and some hubs in the Far East, even before this big surge. The surge is making it worse and causing congestion, which also helps to put upward pressure on rates, but also causes delays. So there may be, some shippers who are trying to meet those deadlines that now are not, but they already have these orders on the way, and that will keep volumes higher for a little longer. Carriers are planning to introduce GRIs, right, starting today, July 1st, and peak season surcharges for a lot of these lanes, some of them very, very significant. Those are the announced levels, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that's what freight rates are actually going to do. They might vary briefly as those are introduced. So we'll really kind of see in the next couple of weeks what rates are going to do, and depending on what rates are going to do, that will reflect, where we are relative to peak season peak. There are some additional increases just now being announced for August, but again, carriers can or often do announce price increases that they don't necessarily implement, or they don't necessarily implement to the level that they have required to announce them before. So we'll have to wait and see. I would think that we probably will see rates increase to start July, as I haven't heard of kind of big drop-offs in bookings or in demand. But I would also think that certainly by the end of July, or maybe by mid-July, we're already starting to see some easing.
Okay, so watch this space as always.
That's why we get them to keep coming back.
Exactly. All right, that's all we have time for. Thank you, Judah. If you enjoyed this session, please hit the subscribe button and you'll get notified about all our future updates. Thank you for listening and have a great day.